So I just finished reading Video Girl I, and I want to talk a little bit about it. You see, this is a Shonen Jump rom-com from 1989, and while it's far from being the first Shonen Romcom to ever exist, at this point we were still moving from the first era of Harem Romcoms, and a lot of tropes and influences that we were used to seeing from the genre would only appear in the years after the release of Video Girl I. In that regard, it's always interesting to read manga from this time. You can see how and why some of the tropes were formed and find manga that are not shackled by them. You never know what you can find, and in this particular instance what I found was probably one of the worst rom-com main characters I've ever read. And I know what you're thinking, that's a hard act to beat. Rom-com main characters are normally considered to be the bottom of the barrel, the worst of the worst, the most formulaic and basic of main characters, so how does this guy manage to beat them all? Well, curiously enough, Video Girl I and its main characters seem at first like a direct contrast and response to the main complaints that people have with long-form harem rom-coms. If you hate how the main character never takes initiative, how the romantic plot never moves forward, or how the characters just stay in a constant state of limbo, then Video Girl I seems like a promising alternative. But it is in how the manga moves away from these problems that we start to understand why the authors still rely on these practices, and how bad things can get by continuously trying to keep the romantic plot moving in a long-form story. But before we get into how, spoiler alert, I'm going to be talking about some events at the beginning, middle, and end of the manga, almost beat by beat. While I won't spoil the ending, I'm probably going to be talking about the events as close as the last 3 volumes of the series, so if you don't want to get spoiled, check the video after you're done reading. Okay, so let's meet our characters. For the purpose of this video, we need to know 4 characters, being of course the main character and his 3 romantic interests. The main character is Yota Motoyoshi. When he's introduced, he feels like the traditional rom-com main character. He's a weak, sad nerd that can't get any girl, even nicknamed Dateless. But don't worry, as we move through the story, his personality will change and be more solidified as the assholest of all the dudes. So, the girls. We got Mohemi first, the classic girl next door. She is Yoda's first romantic interest, the girl that he likes at the beginning of the series. And sadly for him, however, she likes his cooler best friend. Then there's Ai, the titular Video Girl Ai. She appears from a VHS that Yoda finds after having his heart broken, and she promises to him to help him with his love problems. She is, of course, the main girl of the manga, and as time moves forward, more of a romantic interest. And finally, there's Nabuko, a younger girl that has a crush on Yoda. While Nabuko is the last girl to be introduced and the first to be discarded, her role in destroying the balance of the story is perhaps the most important. Before her introduction, the relationship between the characters not only works, but it's interesting. On one hand, we see Yoda doing his best to support Moemi in getting in a relationship with his own best friend despite everything, and we can see how both he loves her and how she loves his friends a lot. But through it, they grow closer and closer to each other, even leading to interesting dynamics as Yoda's friend does not want to even give her a chance because he knows Yoda likes her, which causes a very interesting friction between the two of them. And on the other hand, Ai's there to help and cheer Yoda out herself, and while there isn't a romantic relationship yet, we can see how they actually work really well together. That leaves us not only wondering which girl is the best for him to end, but also turns us apart as we cheer for either Ai or Moemi to be the final girl. At this point, not only is the manga enjoyable, but so is Yoda. We can see through his efforts with Mohemi that he's a good guy at heart, and we can even understand why someone like her and I could eventually fall in love with him. This, however, only lasts for the first couple of volumes. By the middle of volume 3, some things have changed. The plot surrounding Ai starts developing fast, as she and Yoda start really developing feelings for each other. But Ai has very limited time with Yoda, as when her VHS playback time runs out, she will be sent back and her memories rewind. However, after an arc that involves Yoda going to extreme lengths to save her, Ai ends up disappearing for a while, and it's during this while that we get introduced to Nobuko. The girl that likes the main character from the get-go is something that we can see in other manga, like Tachibana Marika from Nisekoi or Kitaoji from Ichigo 100%, 2 later series from Weekly Shonen Jump. What I think is interesting in comparing the later 2 with Nobuko is that all of them are the 3rd later edition, mainly introduced to spice up the manga they're in, but it is also clear that they are the least likely to end up being the final girl. And that's all fine and dandy, I see their role, but the difference here is that Yoda dates Nabuko. And what I mean isn't that Nabuko is the final girl or anything, rather he starts dating her not too long after she is introduced. And while this can sound like an interesting development, it kickstarts what will be the main dramatic drive of the story for the next 90 chapters of the series. At this point, Ai is back, and even though she has lost her memory, Yoda has grown to a point where he can admit to himself that he loves her, maybe even more than he did Mohemi. In fact, it's while thinking about how much he cares about Ai that he starts giving Nobuko hints that he might be interested in dating her. He hates her because it's easy, and because he pities her to a degree. And again, my problem isn't in this arc in a vacuum, but it does start to paint our character in a bad light when his first relationship is mostly filled with him thinking about another girl. Now, this arc is mainly divided in two parts. The first is all about Yoda forcing himself to date Nobuko and learn to care about her, all while the interference of Ai and the resurging feelings of love towards Yoda. It ends with Yoda, after a very sexually portrayed makeout section, getting a cryptic call from Ai in the middle of the night and leaving Nobuko in bed to go after her. The second half sees Nobuko distancing herself and Ai getting closer and closer to Yoda, but with no formal breakup. I should also note, in a positive light, that I find really amazing how well Yoda and Ai's relationship is reformed without Ai regaining her memory. In fact, by the time that she does, almost towards the end of the manga, the impact on the relationship is somewhat minimal. But moving back to the plot, Nobuko ends up rejecting a guy who ends up being hospitalized, who she blames herself for it, as she thinks he hurt himself trying to deal with the rejection, which is kinda true. But it turns out that it was actually the main bad guy. Yes, there is a main bad guy. Is not that relevant for this topic. And he gave the kid what is essentially a living sex doll, and he just distracted with her for a week non-stop and ended up over-exhausting himself. Anyways, the point is, Nobuko spends most of her days with this new guy at the hospital, while Yoda spends most of his days with Ai. And because this is a time without cell phones, we actually start seeing Nobuko and Yoda stop communicating for weeks at a time, culminating in Nobuko accidentally meeting Yoda and Ai in the pool, causing them to fight, Yoda slapping her and she telling him that she will do her best to hate him, and running away. You'd assume that this would mean that they break up, and to be fair, that's kinda-ish how Yoda acts, moving back to build his relationship with Ai. However, the breakup only officially happens in a later meeting several chapters afterwards. And, well, despite this relationship being completely forced out of nowhere and having spent half of it with the characters separated and kind of flirting with other characters, at least it's over. Yoda leaves with a strong relationship with Ai, and while another girl is introduced at this point, she does not serve as a distraction for him. So now it's free to pursue the girl that he was striving for during all of his relationship, except it's at this point that Yoda starts to mainly care for Nobuko. Now that she's gone, he suddenly gets extremely depressed over her being the girl that he likes, and now it's over. When the only genuine time it seems like he actually loved her was when she was in bed with him. Throughout the relationship, every time he had to pick between going after Ai or Nobuko, Yoda picked Ai. But now when faced with the same choice, he goes after Nobuko, though getting rejected again, like he should. With the final for real end of Nobuko's arc, we go back to the previous dynamic as we start to focus back on Moemi and Yoda's feelings for her, but at this point, more than half of the manga has been spent with him choosing between two other girls. It's weird when the manga tries to return to the original status quo as if it was nothing. That said, it does take a bit, but it works. Mohemi has been dating Yoda's best friend, but the love isn't there, which brings back the rift between them, culminating in a very dark arc that involves crime being committed to Moemi, but her being rescued by Yoda. Moemi becomes obviously traumatized by the whole situation, and while I wouldn't say that the manga deals with trauma perfectly, it at least tries to give some respect and attention. But it is important to note that the following arcs have a very fragile Moemi, and it is Yoda who cares for her. We see that genuine love from the beginning of the series to appear back again, to a point where literally every other character wants them to be together. Moemi and Yoda's friend finally break up at the same time as Yoda confesses his feelings, which completely destroys Mohemi. However, Mohemi does decide that Yoda is the best person for her and agrees to start dating. And this is the moment the last 8 volumes have kind of been building up to. This feels like the end of the story, the final culmination, at least for a while. Sure, there's still things that Moemi and Yoda needs to deal together, and especially when it comes to Moemi's traumas and how it affects the relationship, as well as a couple of aspects into Ai's video girl plot, which we are mostly skipping here, but it is about half of the manga. But instead, right from the moment they start dating, Yoda starts to feel distant, going straight back to thinking about Nobuko, which he hasn't done once since going back to try to get Mohemi. Those two do have a weird final conclusion that it feels like it doesn't matter at this point. Nobuko hasn't been relevant in volumes. The manga tries to sell as Yoda wanting to move on from the relationship to focus on Moemi, but what it feels like is that he can't really commit. The moment he got the love of his life after all the trials that they went through and after all that she suffered throughout the manga, and to finally accept that she should be happier with Yoda over anyone else, Yoda just betrays her instantly, not by cheating but by automatically treating her like she's secondary. On the other hand, Moimi's feelings also changed drastically. Suddenly she loves Yoda and will do anything to keep in a relationship with her, even if she doesn't love her. It's almost bizarre how aggressive she becomes, having in mind the story up to this point. She even goes as far as doing things that she's not really mentally prepared for, and it's those things that kinda work with Yoda. Rather than any other action, it's when Moimi shows her legs or makes out with him that he looks at her with a desire that is portrayed as love, but really isn't. Both of them start feeling like the only way their relationship can finally bloom is when they both end up having sex, which is a bad message in of it itself, but it's an even worse one when the girl is still traumatized by being sexually assaulted. Meanwhile, the relationship of Yoda and I keeps growing, of course, with them working together in a children's book and spending more and more time together. But it's hard to cheer for them at this point. Yoda had many chances to commit to Ai, and he chose to ignore them completely, and through its choices, he absolutely ruined two girls in a very unfair and ugly way. And you're supposed to feel sad for Yoda, for not knowing who he truly loves, for being confused, for suffering through his undecisions. But the reality of the situation is that Yoda does not deserve any of the girls in the series, rather he deserves to be alone. I spent more than half this manga just praying for him to just let someone be happy, or at the very least not destroy them further. But instead Rem's first interrelationship he doesn't care about, with a girl who genuinely loves him, and then cries about missing her only after the relationship ends. And then he proceeds to pressure a traumatized girl into a relationship only to emotionally discard her once they're finally together. And that is why Yoda Moriyushi, in my opinion, is the worst rom-com main character I've read so far. If you enjoyed this video, you may be interested in checking my channel out. I do videos on manga. If you want another play-by-play video on what a manga did wrong, I went through all of Child, Shonen Jump's semi-recent mess. That's the video on the left, and if you watched it to here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.